Hey everybody, still here. Daily Market Pulse for Monday, April 28th, 2014. So the stocks were essentially mixed. We had the Dow, S&P up, NASDAQ still down, um, and the volume was higher, considerably higher, in fact, than Friday's volume, interestingly enough. So we had some decent lower shadows, regardless of the NASDAQ being closing down negative on all indexes, of course, here. That is telling me that the buyers were stepping in, especially with this volume spike like it was. Chances are, as I said, we're seeing a spike here in we're seeing a spike in buyers. So let's take a look at the charts. We got the Nasdaq. That's not the Nasdaq. I'm sorry, the Dow Jones. What I'm looking for. Oh goodness gracious, that's not what I wanted to do. I just did something very very errorless. Here we go. Dow Jones. Let's get it done. No, there. Dow Jones. There we go. So there is your Friday candle. We have now today's green candle on the Dow Jones bouncing off the 50 and the 20. So still under the resistance area of 1660. So reasonable for the time being, but we will see there's still stochastics that is sort of below 50 here that could still drop to 20 or 30 for that matter, which means it could still go lower. So keep an eye on these levels regardless. Let's look at the S&P. S&P bouncing, you can see lower shadow off the pivot area at 1850, 1855. It's kind of like a spinning top, but still below 1885 as well, but also above the rising 20 and the rising 50 as we might expect. NASDAQ still in its downtrending channel. You can see the lower shadow here again, same thing. On the intraday, there's a little bit of a channel as well. That's why that blue line is right there. There's still room down lower if it's so choose to do so. Uh, and maybe retest 4,000 once again. Again, volume above and higher on all indexes. This finished red, yes, but that lower shadow and the higher volume probably is telling you the buyers were attempting to step in and take this higher. TSX still going sideways after a full week above the polarity change at about 14,500. Still holding for now. Totally range bound, very tight range. DAX still sort of range bound between 98 and 9,000, but uh, that range may be narrowing to something below 9,700 and above 9,200 as well. That range from 800 maybe dropping to 500 now. Still in that zone. U.S. dollar, Canadian dollar. If we look at this, we're seeing kind of a grind into the 50, which is flat. A little bit of a pivot area in here as well, near 110, 111, I should say. That's about it for the time being. Nothing really committed one way or the other. Same thing here for the most part, although there's a rising trend. There's a little bit of room to 139 and then maybe 139.50. Treasuries sold off following Friday's bump into 135 resistance. So it's come back to the 8 moving average. It's come back to a polarity of sorts at 134 and holding for the time being. When we look at the yen has bounced in the last several days from its moving averages, looking back toward 98.50 or more. Today declined slightly to just to retest those levels. Let's see what they do if they break below 97.35 to drop all the way into 96, or will they break above 98 to get back up toward 98.50 or more. Okay, gold on the other hand, gold continues to retest 1280, the original polarity area. It came back, retested, bounced, following a hottomy on Thursday. I'm sorry, Wednesday, and then we had a nice bounce on Thursday, Friday. Green candle today, the red. Slight pause is profit taking perhaps after a decent move from the lows or the bottom. And you look at silver, it's almost identical again in terms of what gold has done, but slight variations. Whereas it did not have a decent bounce, not as good of a bounce off the lows in the first part of April as gold did, but it did come back down into 1950, 1935, almost essentially 1900 to retest those levels. Still looks okay from the standpoint of the bulls stepping in, especially with that lower shadow, to bump up and through 20, back to 2050, 21, and then 22. As we look over at crude, crude had a nice run for a while. faded back toward the moving averages and the lower trend line, faded through there Friday and closing below all that, below the 50, below the trend line, but into the 200 and bouncing somewhat today. You can still see from the last 4 candles, there's not much commitment in terms of direction just yet, except for maybe to the downside, to follow an 8, which is now crossing below a 20. If that 20 flattens, we have a 200 that's flat right here as well. So there's some strength in some places, but if they start breaking down from these levels here, below 100, even below 100.75, it could get into the 97, 97.50 area. Small caps risk on is right now toying with the lower part of the bullish channel in blue. The 200-day moving average, including the series of lows and the spinning tops doji formations that occurred a couple weeks back right at 110. So that looks like a support area for the time being. Looking for a bullish candle to confirm that lower shadow from today. And then we go over to the VIX. The VIX pretty quiet, not doing a whole lot. Came up to a new high above 15, almost 1550, and then faded and finished near its session low. Essentially almost neutral compared to Friday's very small candle as the VIX continues to hold below the 20 and the 50-day moving average, including the 200, all three clustered very tightly together.